The Usumacinta River winds through the dense jungle of Chiapas, Mexico, a waterway that has guarded secrets for over 1,000 years. Few venture into this remote stretch of terrain. The jungle is unforgiving, the river's currents unpredictable, and the ruins scattered throughout remain largely unmapped. But when a violent landslide tears through the riverbank during the rainy season, it exposes something that archaeologists have searched for decades to find. A stone figure with eyes inlaid in jade, half buried in mud and roots, bearing inscriptions that no current database could match. Two brothers, Gabriel, a historian obsessed with pre-Columbian cultures, and Marco, a practical explorer, discover the statue by accident while surveying the damage. Within hours, they realize that what emerged from the earth is far more significant than a single artifact. It is a doorway to an entire hidden complex, buried beneath centuries of jungle growth and geological upheaval. But they are not alone in their discovery. Others have heard the whispers. Rivals, collectors, and those with vested interests in keeping certain histories hidden begin closing in. What follows is a race against time, conflicting ambitions, and the very real dangers of a jungle that has already proven its destructive power. Chapter 1. The Storm's Gift. The Usumacinta River roared with unforgiving power that October morning, swollen by 3 weeks of relentless rain that had turned the jungle into a maze of waterfalls and rushing streams. Gabriel pressed his hand against the rope, testing its grip as he prepared to descend toward the riverbank. The wet cordage felt alive beneath his palm, slick, treacherous, a reminder that the jungle respected no hesitation. "This is madness," Marco called from above, his voice barely audible over the rush of water. "We should wait for the river to settle. The settlement is 3 kilometers downriver," Gabriel replied, his eyes fixed on the scarred riverbank below. "If the erosion continues, everything exposed will be lost or buried again. We may never get another chance." The night before, a farmer had radioed news of a massive landslide near their base camp. 20 meters of earth and stone had collapsed into the river, and in the debris, he claimed to have seen something unnatural, a shape, angular and deliberate, nothing like the random rocks that littered Chiapas's landscape. Gabriel had recognized the description immediately. It was the kind of observation that changed careers or consumed them entirely. He rappelled down the muddy incline, his boots finding purchase on exposed tree roots and loose stone. The air hung thick with the smell of wet earth and vegetation, rich, almost suffocating. Above him, the canopy was so dense that little light penetrated, casting everything in shades of grey and green. The sound of cascading water echoed off the rocks, a constant percussion that made concentration difficult. When his feet touched solid ground, Gabriel moved quickly toward the debris field. The landslide had created a chaotic landscape of boulders, shattered clay, and uprooted trees. Some of the wood was ancient. Gabriel could tell by the weight of it, the color of the heartwood now exposed to air and light for the first time in centuries. The river had carved a new path through the collapse, and the current was already beginning to reshape the terrain. It was Marco who spotted it first. "Gabriel, here." His brother stood perhaps 40 meters upstream, crouched beside a massive tangle of roots and mud. As Gabriel approached, he saw what had caught Marco's attention. At first, it looked like another boulder, dark stone, weathered, unremarkable in shape. But then Gabriel's eyes adjusted to the shadow, and he saw the curve. A cheekbone. A smooth surface where stone had been deliberately carved. Gabriel's heart accelerated. He moved closer, his hands trembling slightly as he brushed away the loose earth. The stone was warm from the morning sun, almost alive to the touch. Beneath the accumulated soil, he began to distinguish features: a nose, strong and defined, lips carved with precision, and then, as he cleared away more debris, the eye sockets. But what made him stop breathing was what filled those sockets: Jade, twin pieces of jade, polished smooth and set into the stone with such precision that centuries of burial hadn't dislodged them. Even dulled by age and sediment, they gleamed with an inner luminescence that seemed impossible. The eyes stared upward, unseeing but somehow aware, as though the sculpture had been waiting all this time for someone to finally uncover it. "Maya?" Marco asked, his practical nature already taking over. "How old? Pre-classic, maybe. Early classic, if I'm lucky." Gabriel's voice sounded distant, even to himself. "But look at the style, the jade work. I've never seen anything like this outside of museum collections. And those are museum-quality pieces." Marco pulled out his phone, then hesitated. "No signal, which is probably good. We need to think about what this means before—" "Before what?" Gabriel interrupted. "Before we tell anyone. You know how this works. Once word gets out, every treasure hunter from Mexico City to Guatemala will be here with machetes and explosives, looking for more." Marco's jaw was tight. "We need to understand what we've found first, and we need to understand what else might be out there." Gabriel turned back to the statue. The jade eyes seemed to pull at him, drawing him deeper into questions he couldn't yet formulate. The artist who had carved this face had known the land, had walked these same riverbanks, perhaps stood on this very spot centuries ago, before the jungle had swallowed everything. The precision of the work, the deliberate placement of the eyes, it wasn't random. It was a marker, a signal. "We start excavation at first light," Gabriel said quietly. "Carefully, documented, and we tell no one." The river rushed past them, indifferent to their discovery, already beginning to reshape the landscape once again. Somewhere in the jungle above, hidden by the thickness of vegetation and the darkness of the canopy, more secrets waited. The question was whether Gabriel and Marco would have time to find them before someone else did. Chapter 2. The Inheritance. 3 days earlier, Gabriel had received the letter. It was forwarded through his university department. The envelope bearing his grandfather's name in handwriting that belonged to a man dead for 47 years. The postmark was recent, just 10 days old, and it came from a lawyer in Tuxtla Gutierrez with instructions to deliver it only upon Gabriel's graduation with his doctorate in Mesoamerican studies. He had graduated 2 months ago. The letter's contents were maddeningly cryptic. "My grandson, if you are reading this, you have chosen the path I once considered. The land near the Usumacinta belongs to our family. It is not on any map because certain people prefer it that way. In 1962, while surveying that river, I found something that changed my understanding of the world and made me understand why some discoveries must remain hidden. I cannot tell you what. That must be your choice to know or ignore. The property deed is enclosed. Do with it what your conscience permits." Grandfather Marco had thought it was a hoax, a prank by someone at the university. But Gabriel had verified the deed. It was legitimate. Their grandfather, a man they had known only from photographs and stories, had purchased 12 hectares of jungle along the Usumacinta in 1963. The year after, he made his mysterious discovery. He had paid for it with cash, through intermediaries, and the property had been maintained in trust ever since, the taxes paid by an automated legal process that asked no questions. Why had their grandfather never mentioned it? Why had their father never known? Gabriel had the answers now, or at least the beginning of them. The statue with jade eyes was the start of something larger. The question was whether to stop digging or to descend deeper into a mystery that their grandfather had apparently considered too dangerous to pursue. "We should contact the authorities," Marco had said when Gabriel first showed him the letter. "This should go to Aina, or the National Museum, and have the site looted within a week," Gabriel had replied. "You know how it works. Bureaucracy moves slowly. Grave robbers move fast." Now, standing before the exposed statue, Gabriel understood that this wasn't just about academic discovery or historical preservation. It was about inheritance, not just the land, but the responsibility. His grandfather had left it for him because somehow, across decades, he had known that Gabriel would make the right choice. Or perhaps he had hoped Gabriel would be braver than he had been. Marco knelt in the mud, his eyes moving across the landscape with a surveyor's precision. If this is part of a complex, it would be downriver. Settlements typically follow water sources, and if it's buried under the same amount of overburden... He trailed off, calculating. We're talking months of work, maybe a year or more. Then we'd better get started, Gabriel said. Chapter 3. First Signs. The next morning brought better weather. Clouds still thick, but the rain reduced to a drizzle that made the jungle smell like wet stone and decomposing vegetation. Gabriel and Marco had spent the night at their small camp, a collection of tents and supply boxes situated on higher ground, 300 meters from the river. They'd brought minimal equipment, cameras, notebooks, a few basic tools, and enough food for 2 weeks. Anything more elaborate would attract attention. As dawn broke, they returned to the riverbank. The sun hadn't risen above the canopy yet, leaving everything bathed in a pre-dawn grey that somehow made the jungle feel older, as though they were looking not just at the present landscape, but at layers of time compressed into a single view. Gabriel began documenting the statue with methodical precision. He photographed every angle, every detail, the jade eyes unsettlingly vivid even in the dim light, the inscriptions carved along what appeared to be the figure's shoulders and chest, glyphs that Marco photographed separately, close enough to distinguish individual elements. "These are definitely Maya," Gabriel murmured, kneeling to examine a particular series of glyphs. "The style is consistent with early classic, but look, these symbols here, I don't recognize them. They're not in standard reference materials." "So it's rare," Marco said flatly. "Rare doesn't begin to describe it. It's potentially unprecedented." Gabriel's hands moved carefully across the stone surface, avoiding putting pressure on the fragile jade. "This statue might rewrite our understanding of Maya settlement patterns in Chiapas. If this was a deliberate marker, placed as a boundary stone or territorial indicator, then there could be structures nearby that we've completely missed." The sound stopped him mid-sentence. A distant engine, growing gradually louder. Both brothers froze. "That's not a car," Marco whispered. It wasn't. It was a boat, moving upriver with purpose. The engine cut out perhaps 200 meters away, and voices carried across the water. Spanish, filtered through distance and the white noise of the river, but clearly audible. Gabriel and Marco moved quickly, instinctively, gathering their equipment and retreating into the jungle. They positioned themselves behind a massive ceiba tree, its roots creating a natural blind that allowed them to observe without being seen. 3 men emerged from a speedboat, expensive, far too expensive for casual river exploration. 2 were local, indigenous-looking, probably hired labor, but the third was something else entirely. He was American or European, maybe 50, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He carried a handheld GPS unit and expensive binoculars, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had been here before, or who knew exactly what he was looking for. "Check the banks," the man said in accented Spanish. 50 meters upstream and down. Look for anything that doesn't look natural." The 2 local men obeyed instantly, fanning out along the river's edge. The older man remained by the boat, scanning the landscape with his binoculars. For a moment, Gabriel thought those binoculars would turn in their direction. His hand found Marco's arm, squeezing once in warning. But the man's attention moved on, turning upriver, toward where the massive landslide had occurred. "He knows," Marco breathed. "Someone told him." "Or he was already looking for something," Gabriel replied. The question is whether he's looking for what we found, or something else entirely. They watched in silence as the two men searched the riverbank, moving with increasing frustration as they found nothing. After 20 minutes, the older man called them back to the boat. Words were exchanged that Gabriel couldn't quite make out, but the tone was clear: frustration, urgency, orders. The boat turned and headed downstream toward the main settlement. They'll be back, Marco said, with more people, better equipment. I know, Gabriel replied. He was already thinking ahead, calculating how much time they had. 48 hours, maybe 72. We need to map the immediate area, find out if there are other markers, other signs of structures. If this statue is the beginning, we need to know where it leads. And then if you're enjoying this adventure so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Chapter 4. Into the Green. They worked through the afternoon, moving inland from the river in systematic grids. The jungle here was dense in a way that made progress exhausting. Every step required machete work, and the humidity made breathing feel like drinking water directly from the air. The canopy was so thick that the afternoon light barely penetrated, leaving them in a perpetual twilight that distorted distance and direction. Marco consulted the GPS constantly, marking waypoints as they moved. Gabriel kept his eyes on the ground, looking for the markers that pre-Columbian civilizations left behind: changes in elevation, alignments of stones, variations in vegetation growth that might indicate buried structures. It was Marco who found the first real clue. "Stone!" he called, pointing to a faint rectangular outline, barely visible beneath a layer of moss and leaf debris. Gabriel approached and carefully began clearing the area. What emerged was clearly worked stone, a right angle, carved with precision that nature could never achieve. He traced its edges, following the lines downward. They descended, suggesting a structure with depth. "Foundation," Gabriel breathed. "This is the foundation of something." They cleared carefully, revealing a square stone structure, perhaps 1 meter on each side, sunk into the earth. Around it, as they cleared more vegetation, additional stones became visible, arranged in linear patterns. A wall, buried beneath centuries of decomposed vegetation and soil accumulation. They had found the remains of a structure. "How old?" Marco asked. "Hard to say without excavation. But the style of the stonework, it matches what we saw on the statue. Could be 1,400 years old, could be older." Gabriel moved along the wall's length, marking its direction with his compass. "It's oriented north-south. That's consistent with ceremonial Maya architecture." They followed the wall deeper into the jungle. Progress was slow. Every few meters, vegetation had to be cut away, and the constant need to maintain navigation made Gabriel's head ache. But the stone line continued, descending gradually as they moved deeper inland, suggesting that they were walking toward the lower elevation where the Maya would have built, where water would have been. The wall ended abruptly at a stone platform, perhaps 3 meters across, heavily overgrown but still bearing the faint traces of carvings on its upper surface. Gabriel knelt, brushing away decades of accumulated debris, revealing glyphs similar to those on the river statue. But these were different, older perhaps, or in a different hand. A signature. This platform had been built by someone specific, or for someone specific. "This is a ceremonial site," Gabriel said quietly. "This is where they gathered, where they made offerings, conducted rituals. This was sacred ground." Marco pointed with his machete toward the jungle beyond the platform. "Look there." In the distance, barely visible through the vegetation, was a mound. Not natural. The angle was too precise, the slope too regular. Another structure, heavily buried but unmistakable to anyone trained to recognize it. "There's more," Marco said. "How much more, I can't tell. Gabriel stood, surveying the landscape with new understanding. This wasn't just a statue or a single buried building. This was a whole city, lost, forgotten, buried beneath generations of jungle growth. His grandfather had found this, had stood exactly where Gabriel was standing and understood the magnitude of what lay beneath the green, and he had kept it secret for 47 years. "We need to get back to camp," Gabriel said. "We need to map this entire area before that man returns. Because if he finds this—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood. A discovery of this magnitude in the hands of someone motivated by profit rather than preservation would result in chaos, looting, destruction, the irreplaceable loss of cultural heritage that had survived for over a millennium, only to be destroyed in weeks. They moved back toward the river as the light began to fail, the jungle growing darker with each passing minute. Behind them, the mound seemed to watch, waiting for someone to finally understand what it contained. Chapter 5. The Hidden Archive. That night, unable to sleep, Gabriel made a decision. He retrieved his grandfather's letter from the waterproof case where he kept it and read it again, looking for clues he might have missed. In the margins, barely visible, were handwritten notes, coordinates, elevation markers, and most intriguingly, a single phrase repeated 3 times. "Beneath the stone steps. The truth is beneath the stone steps." What stone steps? At first light, Gabriel shared the discovery with Marco. His brother's response was pragmatic. "We find the steps. That's where we focus our excavation." They returned to the ceremonial platform and began searching more carefully, moving outward in expanding circles. It was midday when Gabriel found them, barely visible beneath 70 centimeters of accumulated soil, stone steps descending downward at a steep angle. They were worn smooth by centuries of use, the edges rounded by the passage of countless feet. Gabriel and Marco worked carefully to clear the first few steps. What emerged was the entrance to a structure deliberately built below ground level, likely a pyramid's base chamber, or more intriguingly, a specialized storage chamber. The archway above the steps was carved with glyphs that seemed to shimmer with meaning, just beyond Gabriel's immediate comprehension. "We need proper equipment," Marco said. "Excavation tools, lighting. This is beyond what we can handle alone." But Gabriel was already descending, his phone's light casting long shadows across the stone walls. The passage descended approximately 10 meters, the air growing cooler and damper with each step downward. The walls were lined with carved stones, and Gabriel's flashlight revealed more glyphs, hundreds of them, covering every available surface. At the passage's end, a chamber opened up. What Gabriel's light revealed made him stop breathing entirely. The chamber was perhaps 5 meters square, its walls completely covered in carved inscriptions. But that wasn't what had stolen his breath. It was the contents. Pottery vessels arranged carefully along the walls, their surfaces decorated with detailed painted scenes. Obsidian tools, their edges still sharp after centuries. And most remarkably, a series of thin stone tablets, carefully stacked and preserved in a climate-controlled pocket within the stone structure itself. "My God," Marco breathed from behind him. "It's a library, an archive." "The stone steps," Gabriel whispered. "My grandfather said the truth was beneath the stone steps. He meant this. He meant these." Gabriel's hands trembled as he carefully lifted one of the tablets. The glyph work was dense, detailed, far more elaborate than anything he'd encountered. These could be administrative records, historical narratives, or something even more significant. The sound from above, a distant engine on the river, stopped him cold. "They're back," Marco said, "sooner than we expected." Gabriel carefully replaced the tablet and moved back up the stone steps, his mind racing. They had maybe 20 minutes before the boat reached the area. 20 minutes to cover their excavation, to hide the evidence that they had found the archive. Chapter 6. The watchers, they worked in desperate silence, pulling vines and ferns back over the stone steps, scattering leaves to obscure the fresh digging. Gabriel's hands were muddy, his heart hammering in his chest as voices began to carry across the jungle. Multiple voices this time, moving with purpose through the undergrowth. Marco grabbed Gabriel's arm and pulled him deeper into the jungle, away from the ceremony platform. They crouched behind a massive fallen tree, cameras hidden, notebooks tucked into their packs. The voices grew louder, resolving into distinct words. "Spread out," the European man's voice commanded. 50 meters between each of you. Move methodically. Someone was here recently. I can feel it. Gabriel counted at least 6 people this time, including 2 who appeared to be armed guides carrying machetes with purpose-driven efficiency. The European stood at the ceremony platform, examining the ground with the precision of an archaeologist, or someone trained by archaeologists. He moved to the freshly disturbed earth near the stone steps and knelt, running his fingers across the soil. For a terrifying moment, Gabriel thought the man would excavate, would discover the hidden archive right then, but instead he stood, pulling out a satellite phone. "This is it," he said into the phone. "The scale is larger than we anticipated. I'm sending you coordinates. We'll need a full team. Equipment, supplies for a month-long operation." A pause. No authorities. We handle this privately. By the time anyone in Mexico City knows what's here, it will be safely removed and catalogued. Another pause. Yes, I understand the sensitivity, but this isn't about archaeology. This is about preserving something from vandals and looters. Once we secure the site, we can arrange the proper authorities to take possession of what we believe is appropriate for international museums. We both know what happens to discoveries like this when the government gets involved. Gabriel felt Marco's grip tighten on his arm, not in fear, but in anger. This man was planning systematic looting. He had the resources, the organization, and apparently the connections to do it cleanly, to make it look legitimate. By the time anyone could organize a proper archaeological response, every artifact would be gone. The European ended his call and turned to his team. "Set up a perimeter, post watches through the night. No one enters or leaves this area without our knowledge. This site is now under security protocols." As the men dispersed to set their camp, Gabriel and Marco carefully backed further into the jungle. They moved quietly for 100 meters before daring to speak. "We can't stop them," Marco said quietly. "We're 2 people with machetes and cameras." "No," Gabriel agreed, "but we can document what we've found before they loot it, and we can alert the authorities in a way that makes it difficult for them to ignore." If this treasure hunt already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Chapter 7. The Race. They made it back to their camp as darkness fell completely, the jungle becoming a labyrinth of shadows and sounds. Gabriel immediately began uploading photographs to an encrypted cloud server, images of the statue, the ceremonial platform, the stone steps, and most critically, clear photographs of the glyphs on the tablets inside the chamber. He drafted detailed descriptions, coordinates, and historical context. If the information was already in the cloud, already documented, then at least there would be a record that couldn't be destroyed or erased. Marco worked on contacting people, journalists he knew at major newspapers, documentary filmmakers, and most importantly, contacts at INAH, the Mexican National Institute of Anthropology and History. He sent the photographs, the story of the discovery, and the fact of the European man's presence and apparent plan for systematic removal. "They'll need verification," Marco said as he sent the final message. "They won't act on rumors." "Then we give them verification," Gabriel replied, "in person." They had a small motorboat concealed upstream at a location the local farmer had helped them identify. If they left now, they could reach the main settlement in 4 hours, get to Palenque by dawn, and be in front of INA officials by midday. It would mean abandoning the site temporarily, but it was the only way to ensure that legal intervention happened before the European and his team could complete their operation. They gathered their most critical equipment, the hard drives with photographs, the copies of their grandfather's letter and the property deed, and began the hike toward the hidden boat. The jungle was nearly impenetrable at night, their flashlights creating small spheres of visibility in an endless darkness. Gabriel's mind kept returning to the archive, to those ancient tablets containing knowledge that had survived over 1,000 years, only to nearly be destroyed in the course of a few days. They were perhaps halfway to the boat when they heard voices behind them. "They're moving," someone called out. "2 people heading east toward the settlement." Gabriel and Marco exchanged a glance. The European had posted watchers who had marked them as potential threats. They increased their pace, moving faster despite the danger. A twisted ankle in darkness could be fatal out here, but the alternative was capture, or worse, becoming obstacles in someone's plan to systematically loot an irreplaceable archaeological site. The voices drew closer. Gabriel's breath came in tight gasps, not from exertion, but from the pressure of the moment. They were running for something larger than themselves now, for the history that the archive contained, for the future of their grandfather's discovery and the countless tourists and students who might one day walk through a properly excavated, properly preserved Maya ceremonial center instead of seeing it picked apart by grave robbers. The river materialized through the darkness, its sound growing louder, its presence almost palpable. The boat was visible now, beached on the muddy shore where the farmer had left it. Gabriel and Marco ran the final distance, their pursuers perhaps 100 meters behind, their shouts growing more urgent. Marco started the engine. It caught on the second try, miraculous timing. Gabriel pushed the boat into the current as Marco gunned the throttle. Bullets didn't come. This operation was too sophisticated for such direct methods. But as they moved downstream into the darkness, Gabriel saw lights behind them, flashlights, and beyond them, the larger glow of the Europeans' camp beginning to mobilize. The race had truly begun. Chapter 8: Authority and Conflict. The INAH director was a woman named Dr. Yolanda Reyes, someone who had earned her position through decades of work and had the authority to move quickly when necessary. She listened to Gabriel and Marco's story in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Palenque office, examining photographs on a laptop screen while making notes in a leather journal. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "If authentic, this discovery would rewrite our understanding of classic Maya settlement patterns in the region. The inscriptions alone—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "But you understand the complications. These are on private land, your family's land, which complicates the legal authority we can exercise. The site is being threatened with systematic looting," Gabriel said firmly. "We have photographs, names, and timelines. We can have witnesses verify our observations." "And we will," Dr. Reyes replied. "I'm activating a response team now, but I need to ask you directly, are you prepared for what comes next? If we move to secure this site, if we begin formal excavation, you and your family will be in the spotlight. Cameras, publicity, academic scrutiny. The discovery of your grandfather's secrets." Gabriel had already considered this. The letter would be public. The property deed would be examined. His grandfather's decision to remain silent would need explanation. But the alternative, allowing the archive to be dismantled and sold to private collectors, was unthinkable. "We're prepared," Gabriel said. Dr. Reyes made a phone call, then another. By the time the 4th conversation had begun, a mobilization was underway. Within 6 hours, a team of INAH officials and federal police were heading toward the site. The European and his team would find an armed, official presence waiting for them, a legal barrier that money and sophistication couldn't easily overcome. But complications emerged almost immediately. The European produced permits, sophisticated forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless, claiming he had authorization to conduct a survey on the land. The papers bore official seals and signatures. The police were uncertain whether they had legal standing to prevent his operation. It was the property deed that settled the question. Gabriel and Marco's family ownership, combined with the INAH's emergency declaration of the site as a cultural heritage zone, gave the authorities legal grounds to clear the site, but it also meant direct confrontation. Gabriel watched from a distance as federal police moved through the camp, instructing the Europeans' team to cease operations and evacuate. The European himself seemed unsurprised, even resigned, as though he had anticipated this outcome. He spoke briefly with a lawyer via satellite phone, then gathered his equipment with methodical efficiency. "This isn't over," he said as he passed Gabriel and Marco. "Discoveries like this attract attention from many directions. The question isn't whether this will be looted, it's whether the looting will happen officially or unofficially." It was a veiled threat, but more accurately, it was a statement of reality. The archive's existence was now known. Keeping it truly secure would require constant vigilance, proper funding, and the cooperation of institutions and governments with competing interests. Chapter 9. The Weight of Legacy. The excavation proceeded over the following months with careful precision. The ceremonial platform was fully documented. The stone steps leading to the archive were properly exposed and studied. The tablets were carefully extracted and preserved. And slowly, painstakingly, the story they contained began to emerge. The archive, it turned out, contained administrative records spanning nearly 2 centuries of Maya rule in this region. Tax records, census information, historical narratives of warfare and alliance. But most significantly, it contained evidence of cultural continuity, proof that the civilization here had maintained complex social structures, trade networks and intellectual pursuits right up until the collapse of the classic Maya world. Gabriel published his findings. The site received international attention from legitimate academic institutions. Researchers came from around the world to study the archive. The site was added to UNESCO's list of tentatively protected locations, pending formal recognition. But the European had been right about one thing: attention created complications. There were offers from wealthy collectors, discreet and substantial. There were also complications from the Mexican government regarding who had authority over the discovery and its artifacts. There were questions about proper repatriation, about whether the artifacts should remain in Mexico or be studied internationally, about the rights of indigenous communities who claimed historical connection to the Maya civilization. Gabriel stood at the ceremonial platform one afternoon, 9 months after the discovery, watching as the final phase of excavation was being completed. The jade-eyed statue had been carefully extracted and transported to a secure facility. The archive was being digitized. The site itself was being prepared as a potential archaeological museum. Marco approached, carrying a letter. Another letter, this one from a lawyer representing the European. "A settlement offer," Marco said, handing it to Gabriel. "He's claiming the survey permits were legitimate and asking for compensation for the excavated site." Gabriel read the offer, then set it aside. "No. We could pursue this," Marco continued. "Counterclaims, arbitration, it would be expensive, but—" "No," Gabriel repeated more firmly. "He wanted profit. We found meaning. Those aren't the same thing, and they're not negotiable." Marco nodded, understanding that his brother had moved beyond the practical concerns that usually governed his thinking. This wasn't about property or compensation anymore. It was about something deeper, about the responsibility of being a keeper of history, about the obligation that came with discovering something that didn't belong to you alone. That evening, Gabriel visited their grandfather's grave for the first time since learning about the discovery. He brought photographs of the site, the archive, the jade-eyed statue with its unsettling eyes that seemed to hold the knowledge of centuries. "I found what you left," Gabriel said quietly, kneeling at the grave marker. "I found the door you left open, and I kept it safe. That's what you needed someone to do, to be brave enough to protect it, even when protection was complicated and came at a cost." The sun was setting across the Chiapas landscape, the light turning golden, the shadows growing long. Somewhere in the jungle beyond Palenque, the ceremonial platform waited. The archive would be studied for decades, perhaps centuries. The story of the Maya people in this region would be understood more fully because of what had been hidden beneath the stone steps. But the true discovery, Gabriel understood now, wasn't the artifacts or the archive. It was the recognition that history survives not because of monuments or wealth, but because of the choices people make to preserve it, sometimes against tremendous pressure to monetize, sell, or forget. The Jade Eyes watched from their protective case in a museum facility 50 kilometers away. They had watched empires rise and fall, had witnessed the slow transformation of jungle into civilization and civilization back into jungle again. They would watch for another 1,000 years if humanity proved worthy of protecting them. Gabriel placed his hand on his grandfather's grave marker and made a silent promise. The discovery would be preserved. The legacy would continue. And one day, when Gabriel had children of his own, they too would understand the weight of guarding secrets that didn't belong to them alone, secrets that belonged to history itself. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of discovery and hidden history. See you in the next adventure. The Usumacinta River still flows through Chiapas, carrying the secrets of centuries in its currents. The ceremonial platform still stands, though now it stands with documentation, protection, and the understanding that it matters. The archive's tablets still contain their ancient stories, though now those stories are being read and shared rather than remaining hidden in darkness. And somewhere, in a museum's climate-controlled vault, the Jade Eyes continue their eternal watch, waiting for the next generation of seekers, the next keepers of history, the next dreamers who understand that the greatest treasure is never the gold or the artifacts, but the truth that connects us across the millennia to those who came before.